How it came to men preaching to one another. A man whose dog is out of control will complain about his neighbor's cat. How it came to some insisting that they must enlighten others. A man in the dark who knows where the light switch is but doesn't use it has got to take it out on somebody. A man once asked a mystic, is there some reason other than their ignorance that the ignorant can't help others? And the mystic replied, red hots, get your red hots right here. A man once asked a mystic, is there some reason other than their attempt why those who attempt to help others fail? And the mysterious one replied, red hots, get your red hots with ketchup right here. Though now forgotten by history, there was once a university that attracted men from all over the planet and whose popularity was unrivaled. All of the subjects in its curricula was it made up, and the correct answers to all of its tests were whatever the student put down. The reason you now never hear of this institution is because it became so popular that in the minds of men it simply became life. The minds of the ordinary are as children lost in the woods who attempt to extricate themselves by following a trail of breadcrumbs that they in part daily lay. And a boy asked his father, do I understand aright what you have mentioned over the years, that the more conscious have no heroes nor history on which to rely, because it is that within a sequential reality there is never information pertinent to escape therefrom? Enlightenment could be viewed as knowledge that left its place in line. When he'd awaken each morning, one man would say to his mind, well, what do you want to think of today? And it'd always say, hey man, don't bug me, I've already been at it while you were sleeping. And the man, being the pea brain that he was, would think, well, how cute. The Crown's official lecturer was once speaking to the people in the manner that was his normal wont, condemning far and wide most of their interest, morality, and everyday behavior. But on this particular occasion, someone in the crowd responded and said, why do I have the feeling that when you preach to us that you're actually addressing your own dreads and guilt? And, figuring the jig was up, the next day he requested to be transferred to the Department of Agriculture. Those who board the Mystical Express can berate themselves for lack of effort profitably only for a finite period of time. Beyond that, actual effort is required. Men whose personal sense of themselves is based on some aspects, or plural, of their culture, religion, or civilization have what is commonly referred to as a personality, which is taken to be individual and unique to that person, but which even a cursory examination will reveal it is not. And you ask, how do not men realize this? And I reply, but if they did, what would they do after that? And you reply, how should I know? I'm just here with a tour. One lazy summer day, a man finally caught up with life and said, tell me one thing. Why do humans believe that they are never doing exactly what they should be doing? And life paused long enough to say, have you ever considered the obvious in this regard? And as it began to walk away, the man clutched after it and said, wait, there are two obviouses possible in response to my question. Which one is it? And life pulled away from the man's grasp and left muttering about how it couldn't believe some of the stupid things men would ask. One man so concluded, though I've never heard the term, there must be such a thing as negative enlightenment, such as and ultimately realizing that drugs and alcohol, for instance, are not as enjoyable and helpful as you originally perceived them to be. He felt the urge to add rats to his realization, but resisted, figuring that he had long ago already given over more than sufficient attention to meaningless acts. Somewhere, a bit past middle age, One man took all of the thoughts he had ever had thus far and dressed them up as chickens. The scrawl on one secret wall read, "If the extraordinary wasn't extraordinary, it would just be ordinary." And underneath that, no one had written anything else. After many years of abuse, one man's liver up and ran away. His mind is now considering its options. Two children were talking, and one of them said, "Let's go out and play in the mud." And the other replied, "No, let's celebrate the nature of man." And the first one replied, "Okay, we'll do them both." And the second one asked how, and the first one said, "By doing either one." Then from within, someone's mother called out in an accusatory tone, "Are you playing with that disreputable part of yourself again?" And the kid, once again, wished he was orphaned. The main reason that men can't understand the mind is because they don't want to. A man wrote to Dr. Reason and said, "Dear doctor, can you tell me the reason that?" And the doctor interrupted him right there. A would-be knight once approached the head of an order and said to him, who said to him, "Of those who walk through the door seeking to join us are some who, when asked, say that they are able to accept the possibility of life kneeing them in the groin. But few are those, when asked, who can say that they are able to accept the idea of life wanting to knee them in the groin." As the applicant stood there, now not knowing what to say, his potential liege continued. All of this, of course, being an illusion, like everything else outside the walls of our activity here. The only reason that meaningless hectoring continues to be operational is because of those hectored to continuing to react to it. The unseen hand of life writes up man's collective mental menu, but partaking only therefrom offers insufficient nourishment for the few. For many years, one man struggled to quit criticizing others, and by the time he realized what a moot effort it was too late. He had damn near stopped thinking about them altogether. Life has two general ways it keeps its slaves down on the plantation. It makes some of them weak, and the remainder stupid. Although someone riding past on a fast horse would have trouble distinguishing the two. A man wrote to Life and complained, I have been seeing a certain show on television recently that," and you can imagine the rest. "Come to think of it, this brings up yet another singular aspect of man. He is the only creature who will use death as a threat in the defense of life's honor. Doesn't it just tickle you pretty to have been born on this planet so you didn't miss all this?" A man challenged his mind and his body to prove which one of them was of the greater benefit to him, and they both just laughed at him. They later told Life, and it laughed about it too. In the context of just mental operations, the awakened are like a man playing handball on a court with no walls. A boy asked his father to give him some rules to live by, and the elder replied, "I have already considered doing this, but there is a danger in that if I do, and you do not use them, you can become the worse for it." One man's private slogan to himself was, "Don't argue with me." "Who, me? Yeah, you." End quote. The ordinary take the fantasy world of fiction as offering the maximum in unexpected thrills, chills, and delights. But if they could be inside a mystic's mind for a couple of seconds, they'd come out with a whole new appreciation of what the extraordinary is really all about. Either that or it'd scare the shit out of them. It is the simple who worry about their possible evolution. The worthy do something about it. Second verse, the simple always say, "Well, I don't know what to do." Final verse. Yeah. That was all of it. Everyone dreams of man being better. Again, taking into account only the mainstream, ordinary, sane people of the planet. In that framework, everyone dreams of man being better. The more simple dream of man in the sense of being better, they dream of it as hitting the number, hitting the jackpot, the lotto, the state lottery. The more cultivated dream of man as being more civilized. And the religious, as always, dream of man improving after death. That always makes you want to just stop and kind of find a street corner, doesn't it? And stand there and think, well, damn it. Even if they don't know what they're doing, they got something there. It is the world's safest con game, the world's safest fraud. It's like going out and attempting to sell aluminum siding to honest burgers, siding of which made out of cardboard, but to be able to do so and it never rain while you're alive. It is a beautiful swindle idea, beautiful concept, I should be saying. That about covers the general field of ordinary people dreaming of man being better. Again, I repeat, it does not have to be in a mystical context, and all that was not to be meant to be funny, sarcastic, or accusatory itself. The simple simply do. I just picked out one example, but to the more simple on the planet, always, and contemporaneously so, always dream of the betterment of life. And the more simple you are, you think of man being better primarily on a local, personal basis. That is, the more simple you are, the less your idea of man being better reaches much further than, your own skin. In other words, when you find the more simple of the planet and you say, what would be your idea of man being better? I can almost guarantee you that right from their lips, at least the second or third word in their response will be I. You say, if you said, do you think about life and man being better? And they might go, okay. And you go, well, in what way do you think about it? I'm doing a survey. And they'll probably either the first word, or as I said, or within two or three will be, well, of course they may say me hitting the jackpot, me being rich. Whereas when you move up, in a sense, up the human nervous system as reflected in the external world, also, to my next example, I said the more cultivated, that is, the less simplistic of the world. If you ask them what's their dream of man being better, it begins to go outside of themselves. It is still selfish, as it should be, and self-centered. But then they will say something, they will begin to express ideas that the man would be better if everyone was a bit more civilized, if we had less crime, if it was safer to live. But being more civilized, if you understand the sense in which I mean it, that would be probably their response. Of course, if they had to explain it in more detail, it's that they wish that they think that man would be better if he was more civilized because it would be better on them. As always, it's life making them do it, so it's not that they have any hidden plan behind this, and it's not as though they understand what they're saying. But anyway, their view would be outside themselves, outside their immediate skin. And the religious, of course, take it a bit further. It's not only outside their skin, it's outside this lifetime. That the idea of man being better, yes, they do dream of it. And you go, could you give an example? Well, yes, if you live a Christian or Jewish or Buddhist life, and then after you die, we're in heaven, everything will be better. That about covers ideas of man being better at the ordinary level. Those sometimes referred to as mystics, who does that? Well, sometimes you do, and I went along with it. They have a unique view of it. it is unique in a way that is not only surprising, and I say that just as a entree into this because it's beyond surprising. The old biblical idea in the Western world of some future date of there being a much better day, some future time, a much better day, whether it be after life or not, but a much better day. And they love to, a common quote from the Old Testament, I believe it is the day in which the lamb will lay down with the lion. Now, even the ordinary, if questioned, they must understand that that has a metaphorical basis, because that is not, even in the ordinary terms, that is not to be expected. That would interfere with the food chain of life. Things would fall apart. So even they, whether they ever stop and think about it, but even they would be forced to, if they're ordinary, would be forced to go, well, yeah, it must have some other meaning. But what is the other meaning? Even after we discount the obviously spurious and impossible or destructive nature of that becoming a reality, because it would break down literally at the most simplistic, instinctive, physical level. On this planet, it would break everything down. Would indeed the lion and lamb could lay down together, and the lion didn't eat up the lamb. The lion's going to starve to death. Everybody's going to starve to death. We'll eventually starve to death. So, even the ordinary, I'll give them credit, if they were questioning about it in such a way as I did, they would have to say, well, you're right, there must be some other possibility. It must represent something else. But what does it represent? Even though they do not analyze it. What does it represent? The religious would want to mouth something to do with spirituality, etc. But here's what it gets to. It gets to the operations of the human nervous system at the mental level, above the limbic system, above the instinctive level of the human nervous system, into the area commonly referred to, sometimes laughingly referred to, as the mind. I didn't hear anyone laugh, but which told me all I need to know, thank you and good night. What it do represent is this. It would represent inside of the mind, inside the operations of the human brain at the level of so-called consciousness, which is what people call their mind ordinarily. At that level, what they're picturing is a lack of conflict. Or that's what it represents. And we could describe, not improperly, the operations of the mind at its ordinary level in terms of EEC, of engagement, entanglement, and conflict. By the way, those of you keeping notes, I have picked up where we left off last time, even though I didn't say so. Because I threatened I wouldn't have to, because all of you would forget. And of course, those of you who were afraid you'd forget, you were hoping that I would forget so that you wouldn't look so bad if it was ever brought up. And you go, well, you forgot first. We're talking about the same thing where we were last time, which was, if you recall, the setup of the last time we were talking had to do with the impropriety, the questionable conduct of one reacting to and defending one's non-physical position, if you recall. But at any rate, back to where we are tonight, apparently, the operations of the human mind at the ordinary level could properly be described. I could just use one, but I mean, after all, this is showbiz. I could just use conflict and let it go, but engagement, entanglement, and conflict. Now this happens, we've hit this from a myriad of directions, but the whole civilized world of man, or the whole world of man's civilization, everything above and beyond the instinctive, survival-based level, everything else is a kind of intellectual, and oftentimes comes out verbal, dance. Dance in the sense that there are people engaged with one another. There are individuals engaged with one another. There are larger numbers of groups of people engaged, and their whole, at any particular time, there are apparently large sectors of humanity engaged. There apparently is good portions of one whole community, one whole nation, engaged with some other part of another nation, or in some within the national boundaries, they seem to be split up and they're internally engaged with one another. This is the world of civilization. This is the unique world of man on this planet as capable of being seen by a three-dimensional mind. It's the beginning and the end of it. Once you see it, it's not some theory, it's not an accusation, there's nothing at fault, but it is absolutely an invented world compared to the instinctive world. For this thing, if you picture it in a non-judgmental, and certainly not a non-pejorative sense, if you picture that we've left the instinctive, physical, survival-based domain of man, that we're beyond that we're now in the world that is singularly his. Now if you picture it, if you pictured all the humans in the world, that there's like this invisible framework, no one sees it, and I'm about to make gestures and describe it, but it's like this very fragile, almost of a filigree type, but it's running as a connection going from up here, from the head, at least at the level of consciousness, above the limbic system, that everyone is connected. The connections come and go as far as the importance, and you certainly, it does no good. There is no practical basis of trying to even picture. Well, there is some practical basis for you trying to picture it because it's good mental exercise momentarily. But there is no great, ultimate, useful basis for me to try to describe how you are connected to the other 6 billion people on this planet. Because even though we're all connected in one sense, things simply because of spatial dictates, because of the reality of a three-dimensional existence, there is a limit to your awareness of connection to people. So all the way from a hermit, a guy who just stays by himself, or a constructive hermit, a guy that just sticks with his family. Maybe he's just got a wife, or maybe he's a woman with just a husband. That his contacts are just about limited to that. Everything else is just by need of necessity, or just on the basis of necessity. If he has to go out and buy gas, or he has to deal with a stranger. Well, ordinary people, of course, have a wider, sometimes it's known as a circle of friends, acquaintances, the network of his social and business sphere. That is, I didn't mean to make it all this complex. Now, I assume I didn't have to, but you understand the connection, even though literally there is a connection mentally and every other way, but if you picture that there is a connection between you and the other 6 billion people, other than, what, a dozen maybe, 2 dozen at the most, people, the connection is so ephemeral, it is so slight, that it'd be almost impossible to see it in comparison to the way in which you're connected to your husband, your wife, your mother, your father, your brothers and sisters, your boss, your best friends. Then you have also connections, that's not the point tonight, you have connections that are not specific to you, that are not physically specific, and yet you take them to be so. Such as someone who might believe that they might feel, if they took my picture thus far, they might picture a very large connection. In other words, they might understand that between them and most of the 6 billion people on this planet, if they take my picture, that the connection would just be wire thin. Just almost, like a spider web thin. Then they would see the one between themselves and their parents. It's a big thick one. But they might also see a big thick one. Let's say if they were Catholic, they might picture as a big thick connection between them and the Pope. But they've never seen the Pope. They'll never see him. He's on the other side of the world. Or a person might, if they're politically inclined, might feel that they might picture a huge connection between them and the president of their country, their prime minister, their senator, whom they've never met, never been close to. But they perceive it to be an important connection. They'll sit there and discuss the president, what he's done, or they'll discuss what their religion, what a rabbi said. That's really off the point, but there's something you might consider on your own. But this connection are these connections. what an ordinary person, what an ordinary mind takes to be, without them looking at it this way, but they take that to be a part of their mental operation. Better put, they don't take it to be that way, even with my conditions. It is that way, in this sense, that you cannot operate the mind at its ordinary level inside of anything that amounts to a vacuum, anything that even comes close. The operations of the mind at the ordinary level are based upon entanglement, engagement, and conflict. So back to the world for a second. If you picture from you personally, and this is not, it can be useful, if you picture that you literally have a connection up here, not down here, because anyone can agree to that. Well, I meant from the physical level, that there's part of the physical food chain of survival is why the lions and lambs will not lay down physically together. But up here, there's also that you are tied to everyone else mentally. In the sense that were you not tied to people mentally, the mental food chain would fall apart. In the mental food chain, what that amounts to is man's world of civilization. That being everything that is not farming, everything that is not literally survival necessity, a survival necessity. Everything else is civilization. So if you picture this, that this framework, picture you staying there and you and everyone else, you're connected with all of this little fine connections. This structure, if we could stand out 6 billion people out on a big plane, and you picture going above their heads, from everybody's head is like 6 billion little connections going up, and they all meet up there above the heads. Picture that you can get it far enough off the planet that there's a 6 billion people, and above their heads, from their head down, consider that is the physical survival level. For the part of this metaphor, above their heads, where all this came together, would be the unique, singular world of man. And it would, let's assume that it doesn't just come up to some TP point, some apex. Let's assume it all gets together, because it's so complex and there's so many people, they can't all come together. They have to create a structure that probably, let's assume that looked like some sort of abstract. A drawing, a sketch. But of 6 billion of these coming, of course it's more than that, it's 6 billion squared. But it's come up, and imagine this whole thing over the 6 billion. Just floating up in there, well, not floating, but up in there, this structure, like this filigreed wrought iron structure. Can wrought iron be ephemeral? Anyway, this structure, you can almost metaphor yourself to death. What do you mean, almost? At any rate, here's this structure above their head. That is the world of man, and this structure is held up how? We have it? No, not by gravity and not by painting it. Not by starching it. You know how it's held up? By conflict, by disagreement, by entanglement, by engagement. Mentally, your mind would have never operated had it not, if you picture it was like a little sprout coming out. It had to find another sprout that pushed against it. That like went, hey, what are you doing? It had to engage with another mind. Parentheses, S. It's a mind and then minds eventually. It had to engage them. And engage in the sense is really better than conflict, because it doesn't necessarily, it certainly does not insinuate that it does have to come to fisticuffs. But it has to engage other minds. This whole picture, and again, this world, if you're looking at the 6 billion people and the world of man's mind and all of its offshoots, but this whole world is like this structure above their head where, to varying degrees, even though you're not in direct mental contact with all 6 billion people, there's this structure of it coming out to those with whom you are closely connected, and it's, who knows how the thing would look. It's just this huge, gigantic coming together and all tangled up and pushing this way and leaning over at places. And some places may look more symmetrical than others. But here it is, and it's held up. The only way it keeps going is by engagement. That just one guy, if his mind just started going up like this, it would have never gotten anywhere. Put to you another way, they keep dreaming. It's like one version, not understood that way, but the coin of one hand, the sound of one hand, all that stuff. A better one yet, a few people have tried to picture this, and it doesn't do anything with their mind, which I don't know why. They don't learn anything about the mind, but people try to picture, what would it be if a kid grew up by himself? The old wild child idea. They grew up with no human companionship. Would his mind develop? And if so, what would it be like? And they go, boy, that's an unanswerable question. Well, it may be, but goddamn, just them coming up with a question and going, would have answered all kinds of stuff if they'd wanted it answered. But it was good. I'm sure we all enjoyed tonight. Was finally the great revelation. Revelation is why the main reason that men don't understand the workings of the human mind is because they don't want to. All right? That was strictly a sham show, as though you would announce that and wait for applause. Or wait for anything other than looks of bamboozlement. The mind will not operate. It will not even start without engagement. So, not losing your place, of course, if you look upon, with there being no criticism involved, if you look upon it as simply being an operation, a necessity, the necessary basis for the mind to operate to be that of a continual engagement, entanglement, and conflict. It's no real big secret. It's just that people are not equipped and are not accustomed to facing it head on in such a broad range. But it is not unknown, in the sense that none of this is actually unknown, that people here and there will even say that it is good to stay intellectually challenged so as to not to let your neurons and your little brain cells age prematurely. Or they'll be interviewing some little old man or woman who's 70 years old and seems real spry, and they will be singing the praises of going back to community college after you retire, take up some new mental challenge to do something by God. And of course, it doesn't require you just be old, but there are people who will say that being intellectually challenged or creating an intellectual challenge for yourself is beneficial. It's not just beneficial. The mind will not operate if the mind does not have. The mind will not operate at anything approaching a definition of intelligence if it is not engaged in some sense to itself of conflict. The reason that I said originally that when I point out that mystics have a unique view of what a better man would be, and I said it's not only unique, it's surprising because, and then I said it's not only surprising, it's actually unperceivable by the ordinary mind, and it's this. Even the best verbal attempts to describe a state of enlightenment, a more awakened state, strikes ordinary minds. Quite ordinary, strange mind, it strikes them is not only strange, not only extraordinarily strange, but too strange. And why? Assuming that we're both thinking about the best possible explanation ever attempted of what a state of enlightenment would be, you know why it is. It is a man playing handball mentally on a court with no walls. It is, even if, well, if you've never heard such a description, if I was using I metaphorically, if I were to attempt to give a real-time, on-the-spot, best shot at a verbal description of being more conscious, I could say just what I did. It is the mind operating as though it were playing handball on a court sans walls. There is no conflict. There is no engagement. There is no entanglement. But you say out the mind, you go, wait a minute. The mind can hear that metaphor of a man playing handball. We all know what that is. I assume you do. You're in a closed room, and the whole point of handball, you're playing against a wall. And indirectly against an opponent. But anyway, you're playing against a wall. You hit the ball, and it bounces back. And you hit the ball, it bounces back, and you play it up and down on the ceiling. Just speaking it in a mental context, which is sufficient for most purposes. But to be this state of enlightenment, as it's been called in the past, would be like a man that you hit the ball and you're playing handball. Because I've already described, I set it up in describing that the operations of the ordinary mind are like a handball game. That is, there has to be engagement. The engagement, in this sense, changing the metaphor again, or metaphoring a metaphor, the engagement is the wall. The entanglement is you hit it and it keeps coming back. You expect it. The conflict is you hit it at that wall and the wall knocks it back. Of course, the wall doesn't. It's the laws of physics. No, it's not. It's the wall. Okay. A scientific Luddite. At any rate, you can understand, in a sense, a handball game, if you can follow can you simile metaphors? Sure you can. My structure above the heads of everyone coming, that the mind has to become engaged with other minds for it to grow, for this structure to be there. Then in a sense, you understand that is a handball game, it is a kind of competition. Again, it doesn't have to be to the degree that there's some sort of antagonism. It could be a friendly debate, it could be all sorts of things. But it's that same kind of tension, that same kind of engagement that holds up this structure, which is part of the game of seriousness. Now I keep slipping in also, is you must take this seriously. Because if you didn't, the wonderful world of civilization, don't worry about the Huns at the door. Don't worry about the Khans at the door, the Mongols. No. What civilization has to worry about mentally is all of civilization, all of the damn near 6 billion people who are civilized, they're all in their house one day. And there's a knock at the door, and they open the door, and this bozo the clown goes, ooh. That's when they slam the door and go, oh my God. See, because you can fight off the uncivil, you can fight off those with opposing religious or political views. But there it is, the 6 billion serious civilized people. And they open the door, and it's, No. Of course, it doesn't happen. It didn't come to that. Life has it arranged. If anybody ever does knock on the door like that, they know not to answer. They just look off. Or they say, somebody will say, did you hear a knock at the door? And they go, oh, you're hallucinating. You've been reading too many of those weird books, and you're imagining you're hearing knocks. And they go, I guess you're right. They know not to open the door. At any rate, the mind cannot proceed. The mind makes no sense of even the best descriptions. And it's not the fault of the descriptions, but to hear any notion that you can be more conscious. That if you were to start making some public lecture and you made it a conscious point to refrain from using any of the so-called New Age or occult or mystical terms, you made it sound rather scientific about another state of consciousness. About how it could be done. It's not just your opinion, that you didn't just pop up and you're not a crackpot, that there is a lifelong history of this throughout the annals of mankind, though not necessarily understood as such. And you would describe or try to talk about in rather scientific terms, and if then they finally insist, the crowd say, well, could you describe what it would be like to be more conscious? Maybe you even did it, the whole idea of this an accepted fact that they can measure the brain activity and realize that the majority of everyone's brains is not operational. It's alive, but it is not operational in the sense that they can measure other activities, that they can measure the effect that incoming stimuli is having. They can measure the effect that your own body's physiology is having on the brain. It's just a known fact. They used to, the old sophomoric view or description was that it's a known fact that no one uses over 95% of their brain. All right, so you could be using that kind of approach and be saying to this crowd that what we're describing, or what you're talking about, is to make the brain operate in other areas that are there. It's nothing strange, nothing unusual. It's just there, and that even science says that there it is, and it's not functional, or it's not participating in your normal operations. And why not? No one knows. And you're saying there are few people have known this for thousands of years, long before neurosurgeon, etc., and that there are little disciplines or methods or exercises, things you can do that, although it's not as simple, is actually building up a muscle, because the brain really has no feeling. You can't get to it. The brain can't pick up a weight and make itself stronger. And some people say, oh yeah, I understand. You go, so it's more indirect, it's subtle. And as a matter of fact, no one can guarantee that it works with this person or that person, but there are ways that have been used for thousands of years. You understand? You've done all this to your potential crowd, your audience, using no strange terms, saying rather scientific, and they go, well, all right. Then someone in the audience, they assume that you have some experience with it, the way you're speaking, and they say, well, can you describe what it would be like? And you say, all right, here it is. And you start giving them the best description. Let's use mine, just for instance, tonight. You can say, well, to get the brain operating in areas not commonly used through the methods that I'm saying that have been available, been known to a few people, you would say to them, let's say, that either you're insinuating it's on your base of your experience or your interpretation of other people's experience, whatever, but you're saying in a straightforward manner, you're saying the best I can describe it would be a man playing handball. Everybody goes, okay. On a court, yeah, with no walls. And again, we'll assume that your audience or the person who asked, that they are nominally sophisticated verbally, and they listen, and they get the picture. Although it is oxymoronical, because you started off in a good oxymoron. I resent that. No, in a good oxymoron, of course, you do the understandable part. Anytime you're about to pull a non sequitur, you do the non first. I mean, you do the sequitur first, and then you do the non. In other words, you say, a man playing handball. Or, you know, even you lose the even small potential joy in the literal, in the literary oxymoronical entanglement. As you say, all right, you say your description would be a man playing handball. So everybody pictures, all right, a guy in the closed room playing handball. So you don't start off saying, all right, it's a handball court with no walls and a guy playing handball. It's still the same picture, but you understand, it doesn't work. The mind, you've got to lead it like it normally wants to be led. You got to lead it right up to a place and then open the door and kick it in the ass, you know, like, if you're lucky. But you say, all right, my description will be a man playing handball, and everyone goes, yes. On a court, yes, they've already pictured that. With no walls. All right, let's consider just rhythmically that sentence was three parts. Man playing handball, no, yeah. In a court, yeah. With no walls. Right at the end is where the mind finds it just loses it all. And yet you follow literally the picture, but then it's beyond oxymoronical and non-sequential. It's just insanity to the mind. Or put another way, it is too strange. The mind will go, well, you must mean something else. And you go, well, yeah, I do, but I can't give you a better description. That's the best one I can think of right now. In fact, I like it. Yeah, trust me, I like it. And if they give it their best, I go, well, shit, it means nothing. Playing handball, because everybody understands what oxymoron and non-sequitur means. It's something that does not make sense within its own context. The sentence makes sense, man playing handball on a court with no walls. It made sense right until the end. But you cannot say that it's not possible. For one thing, those of you that I'll point to you again, anything a man can describe, anything the human mind can describe that verbally, that rhetorically makes sense, that the sentence actually makes sense, is possible. Now, I know at the ordinary level it's not, because you cannot play handball on a court with no walls. But to just dismiss it and say, well, that is simply a non sequitur, you're just being silly, or you're trying to, pass it off as some kind of metaphysical enlightenment because it's so weird it doesn't make sense. Nah, the sentence makes sense. You understand that. And even though you cannot go find in a three-dimensional world a man playing handball on a court with no walls. I mean, he can try. But all he's going to do is get in one serve. And that's it. So you can't say he played handball. You can say, well, he served it, and then there was no game. No. Just because you can't see it. If a sentence can rhetorically be structured, and the mind go, well, yeah, it's a non sequitur, but yeah, the sentence, I understand what you're saying. Then you make a mistake, just go, well, it can't be. After having made that suggestion, I'll tell you this. That's not a damn suggestion. That's a fact. But the reason the mind makes no sense of the idea of some higher state or some expanded state of awareness is exactly what I'm describing. Because it does not engage any other idea. It is not in conflict with anything else that man has ever thought. It is not entangled. Back to the game. If you could play handball, a man playing handball, yeah, on a court, yeah, with no walls. Now, regardless of the fact that I already pointed out the obvious, that he can't really play handball from an ordinary view. All he can do is make the original serve. He can certainly do that. He can believe he's in a handball court, and he can go and he can serve it, and that's it from an ordinary view. But what would that be if you can carry this metaphor a bit further? If you can do them both at once by realizing that in a three-dimensional world, which is the world of the mind, the ordinary mind, then it can't be. And yet your mind can picture. If you can tiptoe through the minefields enough, the edges of 3D reality, you can picture what I'm trying to point to. To play handball, for the mind to operate in its normal context, it is continually bouncing off of something. It is continually engaging something else. It is continually entangled with it, because it doesn't just engage with it. That's why there is no such thing as a satisfactory conclusion. That's why the civilized world, other than the fact that it's not supposed to come to any satisfactory conclusion, but up in the world of civilization, there is no once and for all overwhelming winning idea. One political philosophy, one religion, one economic model, one anything up in the mental world does not finally, conclusively overcome anything opposing it. If it does, then whatever area this conflict had been in simply disappears. I'll give you a real crude example, is the end of major wars between two groups of people. When one side just finally, when just the other side unconditionally surrenders, I'm giving you a real crude example, but the same thing would be true mentally. But down below this filigreed world above man's heads, down at the instinctive level, men actually end up in combat, either two individuals or large groups of people, like two nations. If they finally reach the point that one unconditionally surrenders, that is, the other group just went, and they're just barely alive, and they saw unconditional surrender, then what apparently was the reality of this theater of war that had been going on for years, maybe decades, it's like it just almost didn't happen. It just kind of goes poof, and it starts getting put down in history books. Now, it almost has no meaning. What if they... This was not the point. But too many of you should be able to hear that, and there are too many blank. Even though this is not the real basis of it, let's say that these two groups I'm picking, two countries or two large groups of people, that while it's still hot, while the combat, while the war is active, it is assumed, it is presented to the world and accepted as such that the war is on the basis of a conflict of ideas, of philosophies, of theologies, of nationalistic models. Because nowadays, well, it's always had a touch of it, but men always proclaim that they're fighting over something other than they are. And so they can say that it's a clash between, let's say, socialism and fascism, or democracy and socialism. And that's the way it's presented constantly. According to what part of the world you're in, where you live, what side you're closer to is how the news will be presented to you. And of course, those involved, it seems to be another way. But anyway, that they're not fighting over just some property or just over a bridge somewhere or a lake. They're fighting over, by God, something of infinite consequence. Whether democracy or fascism will survive, or communism, or whatever the hell it is. And they discuss it. People outside it becomes a major area of discussion that is now above the heads of the combatants. Everybody's discussing this and that. Finally, one side gives up, just unconditionally surrenders. They're almost laid waste, total waste. Think about it. It's happening in most of you people's lifetime, almost the next day. Not almost. I don't know why I keep trying to baby you people. The next day, as far as the news of this horrendous, this blood, either blood heating or blood chilling conflict that was threatening to engulf the rest of the world, because it so reached in to the hearts and the minds of men, because it seemed like the final, or at least at this point, the greatest struggle between conflicting philosophies or conflicting religions. That day's almost gone, but it's all the same thing, that it's a mental conflict. And that was the constant part of the headlines of the news. It would be that one side gains 4 miles at the front, but the subheadline or the text of the articles is always about the implications philosophically of this warfare. That creates as much attention, that men's minds are given as much to the apparent philosophical, read mental, aspects of this conflict as the actual physical battleground, about who won, who took over a bridge, who took over some new town, who pushed the front either 10 miles this way or 10 miles the other way. It's the philosophical aspects. The day after, one side unconditionally surrenders, no one knows it. There is no more discussion. There's nothing about, well, finally, good triumphed. Or finally, now it's proven, fascism is superior to communism. It's just like it never happened. Now they'll continue to report now about trials or about who's going to pay money, the repatriations and this and that. But the so-called philosophical aspects of what it proved, the day after, one side unconditionally surrenders, it's like it just disappears. It'll show up in history books in 4 or 5 years. They'll be teaching in high school. It'll be worth a paragraph. And yet while it's going on, it seems to be of supreme importance. Everyone should understand. Now, I'm not something has to do with warfare and all that. This is inside of each individual's mind, the usefulness of this. This kind of conflict at an individual level, though it's never, of course you know that ordinary people do not analyze warfare in the sense I just did it. So there's no chance that people do it internally, having to do with their own mind. But that is what's going on continually. That is the only way that your mind, no matter who you are, no matter who I am, that's right, no matter who you are, that's how your mind stays upright. That's how your mind apparently stays alive. This in spite of the fact that people will, ordinary people will say that my mind's driving me crazy. Or they could hear me make up one of these stories about a guy talking to his mind and apparently ends up making some insulting remark. And people will laugh. Ordinary people. They don't, and again, notwithstanding the fact that people will, somewhere this side of a full-blown so-called psychosis, that people will just, as a kind of just conversational byplay, will admit that, sometimes my mind drives me crazy. Sometimes I work too hard, the stress gets me, I drink too much coffee, I stay up all night working, and I lay down, I can't go to sleep, my mind, or, whistling this song over and over, do. Notwithstanding all that, that is the nature of their mind staying upright. You're trying to describe something else, and people's mind draws a blank. Of course, it doesn't truly draw a blank, because if it could draw a blank, it could understand a man playing handball on a court with no walls. Because you ask an ordinary man's mind, draw a blank. And they go, well, huh? There you are. Your mind is continually engaged. And again, I've managed to run out of time before I even got to the punchline of last time. But your mind is continually engaged. Your mind is in a kind of warfare, and not that you are continually aware of the fact. And not that you feel that you're constantly walking around your own mind having to fight off the attacks of evil religious or patriotic or economic ideas. You don't look at it that way, but your mind stays alive by being agitated, by being in conflict. It stays alive up here above the level of just the survival instincts. It stays alive up here, and you don't think about it this way, certainly, but it stays alive up here by being in conflict and being agitated by the very thing that I said. Even ordinary people go, well, sometimes my mind it won't shut off. That's the nature of the mind. And people go, yeah, but what I mean is, ordinarily my mind's all right. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not on drugs. Well, I'm saying and the person will say, all I meant was that sometimes maybe I drink too much coffee, or I get upset about something, I worry about something at the office, and I'll lay in bed, and I should be asleep. I got to get up the next day and go back to work, and I'll stay there worried about what somebody said today, or worried about some little something. I go over and over and over and over. All that's the little jokes I've been trying to make in my news stories the last couple of weeks about a guy certain guys I made up and their attitude about dreams and et cetera in the daytime. One thing about it, it just seems to be exaggerated. Sometimes to people's dreams, if you don't get that, it's exaggerated. What I'm talking about, that people take as being an anomaly. They go, well, I know what you mean. Sometimes my mind just gets going, and I wish I could stop it. They say that, but they don't wish they could stop it. Because if they could, if you go, all right, stop it. And then if you brought them out and say, how you like it? They'll go, God damn, get the hell away from me, and they'd run. That's trying to describe what it is to be more conscious. That is the attempts to describe a state of mental liberation or awakening or enlightenment. If, again, you can't have it always, except I do, that if you could make an ordinary man, if you go, well, give me some idea what it's like, and you could go, all right. And you let go a second, and then you brought him out of it. I mean, don't wait for him to shake your hand. Don't even wait for him to stick around to talk to you anymore. The man's going to run like a hound dog that sits down in gasoline. Well, all right. A dog with hemorrhoids that sit down in a can of gasoline. Man, the mind, forget, of course, this is not going to happen, what I just described. Not only can that not happen, to the ordinary mind to describe what it would be for the mind not to be engaged, not to be in conflict, not to be entangled, it just goes, huh? And you thought that I overdid it when I said that a mystic has a unique view of what the betterment of man would be, see? You thought I was exaggerating 50 minutes ago. Of course, now most of you see quite clearly that, huh? It's a betterment to those who understand it, but it's not a betterment to anybody else. It's not a worserment. It's a nothingment. You can say, well, it's a man playing handball, yeah, on a court, yeah, with no walls. They go, thank you, bye.